All right, so South Bow's earnings came out, and they had their quarterly conference call. Since we haven't talked in a couple weeks on the South Bow Bridger expansion project, and they gave us a few nuggets with their earnings release and with the conference call, I thought it'd be a good time to chat about it again and maybe go a little bit more in depth to where this flow path may lead to and who might see upside. As I've mentioned before, if you're interested in what we do, please reach out to me. My email's at the bottom of kind of everything that we write. We give trial access to this tool that I'll be using. So if you're interested in the tool or utilizing Plainview in any way, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you. We enjoy this stuff and like talking to people too. So any questions are welcome as well. So let's just dive in. So I brought up kind of what we know so far. So we've talked on like previous videos a couple weeks ago about this project between South Bow and Bridger. So one part of this appears to be utilizing some of the pre-built capacity, which is composed of a partial pipeline build and some pump stations from Hardisty, Alberta, to the border here. These are old Keystone XL assets, and that would dump into a Bridger pipeline expansion, which is a new build pipeline of 550,000 barrels per day. Keystone, or I should say, South Bow has posted a open season for this project. It's now called the Prairie Connector project. We'll get into this name here hopefully in a little bit. This may be a little Easter egg, a little nugget of information of what this project may turn into. But they do say they're doing the open season for 450,000 barrels per day of firm capacity. So if you remember, Bridger's project said the capacity would be 550. This says 450 of firm. They do have to keep some for uncommitted shippers. So you're looking at around 500,000 barrels a day. Roughly, they're going to be the same size. We did say that their South Bow may leave some optionality to take some Bakken barrels as well. Don't know if they want to do that in batch light and heavy, but that's possibly an option for Bridger to take some of these barrels from the Bakken here. So that's what we know. The open season is going to run until March 30th here, and then there's a 60-day waiting period afterwards to see if they have enough binding commitments to do the project. So that's not really that new. The open season's new. The piece here, the name of the project's new. So we kind of have an idea of what this project's going to look like from this point down to Guernsey. So at Guernsey, though, we still have a lot of questions. We were able to get maybe some information from this open season. So this open season does mention U.S. delivery points of Cushing and all destinations along the U.S. Gulf Coast. So let's talk about kind of the options that we spoke about in the last video of what this project could end up being. And the first one I talked about would be a new build of some sort into Steel City here. I still think that type of project makes a lot of sense, but I get the feeling reading the tea leaves of some of the releases that they've done that they're focusing more on filling the market link Keystone segment, the southbound segment here. So they can still do that by tying into Steel City, but I think they want to follow some existing right of routes that their potential partners may have as well. So that would take this route out of the equation. And we'll talk about why it may not even matter if they go this route. The upsides to this route would be, I think it's a little bit shorter of a distance. You can use both these assets to get to Patoka and then get to Cushing. Both these assets are underutilized here versus some of the other options that we'll talk about here in a second. So let me clear that out. We'll talk about some of the other options. We did mention during the call some sort of an option with Pony Express would be possible. So let's talk about that here. Let me just color this differently. So an option with Pony Express. Pony Express, this main line is full. So they would need to do some sort of a new build. So if I bring up the main line here, you see 348,000 barrels a day of capacity. This doesn't include Seahorse's barrels, but if you put in Seahorse's barrels and stack those on top of this, it's running about 450,000 barrels per day on a 22-inch line. they're likely not going to be able to do much more than that without significant amounts of DRAs, which is going to be uneconomic. Let's talk about a few other things with Pony Express here. Pony Express has this 20-inch line here down to, I believe, Sterling here, Colorado, their Sterling terminal. They also, in 2021, built this 24-inch line here that goes into Buckingham and allowed them to debottleneck some of the capacity from Guernsey into northern Colorado. Again, I don't know, especially with the size of this project coming in and it being heavy coming in here. It seems a little unlikely to me that they could utilize this because they're already using this for light barrels coming from the Bakken and the Powder River. So both of these lines are being used as egress from Guernsey. I just don't think you have enough space with a 36-inch pipeline coming this way and it mostly being heavy barrels likely to utilize this asset. But it is something to keep in mind that they did build this asset and they do have some underutilized capacity running south out of Guernsey into northern Colorado. But this main line is just one line, and this is the bottleneck at this point at 450 roughly 1,000 barrels per day it's running. So a twinning of this pipeline, certainly possible. Again, I get the vibe that they're trying to follow existing right-of-ways for this project to try to avoid some permitting issues, which makes tons of sense to do something like that. Again, the downside to a project that twins this the whole way would be that it's a little bit longer of a path than what like a Guernsey to Steel City would be. So you're building a little bit longer to get into Cushing. A potential upside is you are hitting some of the refineries in Kansas along the way as well if you twinned Pony. So that's an option as well. A third option, which I've hinted on a couple times, but I don't think I've ever talked into detail on this, is a lot of people don't know, and if some people will remember back to a pipeline project called Liberty Pipeline that was pitched pre-COVID. Now, this was a 50-50 joint venture between Bridger and Phillips 66. And during COVID, well, let me just talk about what it is. This was going to be a new build pipeline from Guernsey that was going to come down to the Platteville area, and then it was going to cut across here and kind of go directly into Guernsey. So apologize for not having the map here. I drew the rough look of what this map actually was supposed to look like. But this project, because of COVID, got canceled. But again, what most people don't know is Bridger and Tallgrass actually bought the rights to the project. So that included some 24-inch pipeline that was already delivered as part of this project. I do believe they used some of that pipeline to build, Pony Express used some of that pipeline to build this Guernsey to northern Colorado segment. And they also got the existing right-of-ways or rights to the right-of-ways for however long those may have lasted. Now, some people may poo-poo this and say, hey, it's probably not something that they would consider doing, and that's possible. Maybe the twin of Pony is a better option. But I would note that I did see some county commissioners' minutes from the state of Kansas in this area here where Liberty traversed this past summer, where they said Tallgrass representatives came in and talked about a new pipeline being built through this area, and said explicitly, at least one of the commissioners said explicitly, that it was part of the old Liberty project. And it was an early meeting. They just said they were just reaching out to landowners again. They didn't know if they were going to actually build the project. Tallgrass said that. But it is something that they were poking around here. A second county also mentioned it in their minutes. They didn't give specifics. I did reach out to that county commissioner via phone and spoke to him, and it was a similar story. They were just wanting to get to meet the county commissioners and set up a new pipeline maybe being built through this area in the near future, but we're not specific on if or when it was going to happen. So we do have some evidence that potentially the Liberty pipeline could be resurrected as part of a right-of-way for a solution post-Guernsey for some of these barrels. So I think that covers that. I think I'm leaning, based on some of the talk, to a Pony twin or a Liberty right-of-way, where they're looking at that Liberty right-of-way to use. Both of those solutions go into Kansas, or go into Oklahoma, into Cushing, though. So let's move down the line here now that we've talked about those. Assuming they use one of these paths and push, let's say, 500,000 barrels per day in Cushing, what's the plan from there? So let me clear this out here. So There's existing assets out of Cushing. There's a decent amount of space out of Cushing. There's some to the Gulf Coast. There's some space up into Kansas. There's some capacity via Diamond Pipeline that moves this way to Memphis. There's even some capacity that moves this way to refineries in the Texas Panhandle. But I think, and based on some of the remarks of South Bow during their earnings call, I think they're focusing on the market link section, the Keystone section of their own pipeline to feed more pipeline volumes into this pipeline. And this is something I hadn't really thought of too hard, because I kind of assumed that this pipeline was relatively full, which it is if you assume the capacity is 820,000 barrels per day. However, this is a 36-inch pipeline, so let's back up and talk about Keystone, the legacy Keystone pipeline. Legacy Keystone pipeline is this pipeline here in red. This was a 30-inch pipeline down to Steel City, at which point this turns into a 30-inch pipeline to Patoka. However, this section going down to the Cushing and the Gulf Coast is all 36 inches. So this is a larger pipeline than what's actually bringing the barrels down this way. Another thing to think about is we don't really know what the mix of light and heavies is of this 36-inch pipeline at the border. And let's actually back up a little bit. A 36-inch pipeline, if we look at comparable pipelines to get a rough estimate of what a 36-inch pipeline could carry at max capacity, we can do a comparable, probably the newest and easiest comparable is like the Wink to Webster pipeline. To look at that, that's a 36-inch pipeline out of the Permian carrying light. That can do 1.5 million barrels per day. Now, this segment is unlikely to be able to do 1.5 million barrels a day because it's going to be carrying some heavy volumes. So if we think about a comparable heavy volume 36-inch pipeline, Enbridge's, one of Enbridge's pipelines that moves barrels from Canada into the Midwest is 36 inches. That carries about 800,000 barrels per day. So depending on the mix of light and heavy barrels, you're able to move anywhere from, let's just roughly say, 800,000 barrels per day to 1.5 million barrels per day. Now, again, we don't know exactly what this southern section of Keystone post-Cushing is carrying for light and heavy. We do know up here, if you go up the line, this is mostly heavy. So mostly heavy coming into the U.S., but once it gets to Cushing, you pick up some lights. So again, the amount we don't know for sure. I will tell you that in 2018, they disclosed in one of their filings that they were carrying about 60% light and about 40% heavy. So under that assumption, there would be some space if we assume that they're carrying some lights could shift off of this pipeline, or if there's a mix of light and heavy, their capacity could go potentially much higher than this 820,000 barrels per day I have here. They also disclosed in that regulatory filing that they were planning on going to 990,000 barrels per day of capacity. So if we just look at the flows today, around 700,000 barrels per day of capacity, let's say they could go to 1 million, that's 300,000 barrels a day of capacity. Could Cushing take the extra 200,000? Remember, we have, assuming we have 500,000 barrels per day coming down into Cushing, we can take 300 here. Maybe they can take even more than 300 on this market link segment. Maybe all of it can go down there. Again, it's going to kind of depend on the engineering of the pipeline, how much light and what the light heavy mix is. But they could potentially take some of that, and then that means it's going to Houston, it's going to Nederland. Those are your Port Arthur area. Those are the two areas that those barrels are going down to. So looking less likely as a move to shift these barrels over to Capline. What I would mention is if for some reason they shove 500,000 barrels per day into Cushing and Cushing becomes constrained because of those 500,000 barrels per day, legacy Keystone shippers can shift instead of moving their barrels, which a lot of them move down to Cushing today. I think most of these barrels coming down this line move to Cushing. They can shift some of those barrels to Patoka to avoid a constraint here at Cushing. So it's kind of a solution out of Guernsey toward Cushing kind of makes a lot of sense here, especially if you're trying to fill your market link segment of your pipeline and if this pipeline's expandable in some way. Again, it is 36 inches. I do think it probably could go over 1 million barrels per day, depending on light-heavy mix. So I think that's a good overview there. We'll see what happens. They still have competitors they're competing with for some of these barrels. Enbridge, obviously a very strong competitor, and being able to do their project with not a lot of really no new build. It's all brownfield, no greenfield, but it is a little bit smaller. So economies of scale on the bigger stuff may make more sense. Certainly probably more permitting risk in building a new greenfield pipeline, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But South Bow, if South Bow is able to do this and utilize kind of assets that are just not earning them anything, which would be this Keystone XL project, and then filling up any capacity here, maybe expanding some capacity here, they're able to do that. That's pretty good upside for them to be able to do that. Tallgrass, certainly. Oh, I forgot to mention the Prairie Connector project, the name. Another reason this may link to Tallgrass is I think the company that owns Tallgrass, the private equity company or firm that owns Tallgrass, is called Prairie Acquirer. So maybe that's something to do with that and a tie into Tallgrass in some way via a twin or a new pipeline. I think that makes a lot of sense via the name. So maybe a coincidence, but probably not. We'll see. Yeah, I'll keep this one as short as possible. Thanks for joining. If you have any questions, again, we love to talk about this stuff. Reach out. Everybody have a great weekend. Thanks again.